This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension for lunch, we are in Standing Finance Committee. We revert to Standing Finance Committee.
This House is in Standing Finance Committee. And usually I get the ball rolling after lunch because I don't try not to intervene thereafter. Minister, I heard your consultant, Dr. McLean, referred to what they eloquently spoke about their plan with respect to the black belly sheep and what is happening with Guyana and so on. I'm wondering if there is a local plan with respect to same black belly sheep for that, if there's a local plan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, indeed. This plan actually started with Barbados. We took a paper to Cabinet to agree to the increase in the heads of local black belly sheep up to 1 million heads. Dr. McLean is currently working on a project for Barbados, and what I would do is let him speak to it and let him speak to the overall plans for the black belly sheep program.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The program in Barbados, the program in Guyana runs parallel to development of the population here in Barbados. So it's not a case of one or the other. We're running the two simultaneously. And we are now embarking on what we call a rapid multiplication program, where we have submitted the proposal which would involve using a number of farmers across the island, where we would distribute sheep to farmers, and they would breed these ewes. The ewes would come back to the ministry to be distributed to other farmers, and in that way try to build up the population. Now we have some problems associated with the development of the industry. You will be aware that the black belly sheep sheep farming has not been a real commercial activity in Barbados. And it was mainly activity where people were keeping sheep and not engaged really in serious farming. The result is that we have a number, whereas we have the numbers, not all of them meet the criteria that we would want for development of the industry. So that reduces the number available for us for the breeding program and also for the export. So we are trying to see how we can get that program ramped up. And in addition, we have a problem where the population is highly inbred. And those of us who are familiar with what the black belly sheep looked like years ago will know that nowadays we see rams, for example, that are much smaller than what we were used to. And in that regard, we have now a member of staff of the ministry who is engaged in a research program at the KFIL campus, looking at the incidence of inbreeding and seeing how we can improve the population in that regard. In addition, as you know, feed is one of the problems that farmers face, the high cost of feed. And the program includes using local resources where possible, showing farmers how we can use local resources to produce feed for the animals. And we have just in the process of doing some trials now on some feeds which we have produced using lucina or river tamarind, the waste from agriculture like the sweet potato peelings and the cassava peelings which we get from those persons who are making flour and using it industrially. So the idea is that wherever possible, we will use local resources in order to produce feeds that we can now pass on to farmers the formula for these, that they will be able to produce feed for themselves. And the equipment is not very expensive, and we will be looking to see how using the ministry's rebate system, if we can assist farmers in getting equipment in that regard. But this is something which we are currently in the process of working on. So the aim is to have a viable black belly sheep industry in Barbados. And right now we have on record about 270 farmers. But of those farmers, only about 11 have more than 100 sheep, and about 60 that would have more than 25. So the numbers, it means that we have to spend a lot of time finding farmers with the numbers and also with the quality sheep that we will want to put in the program. And what the feed program, I know there's a demand for sheep for the feed program. And when we get the program going, the rapid multiplication program going, we will be able to meet that demand.
Thank you. One more quick question, Minister, and something you mentioned earlier. In relation to the dam, the pond, remember there was plans to do one at, for the land lease at, behind the police station or the back of the police station. I would have visited the old building. There was an old building below of BADMC at Friendship. I visited there with the manager of agricultural services when I was in the ministry. And there is a nice pond for some runoff there, which is perhaps already is a natural catchment area, and I'm wondering if you have any plans for that. And to me, it's the pond in terms of creating that dam for farmers at Spring Hall is better suited. Do you have any plans for that? You know, has it been discussed in the ministry?
Thank you, Chair. Crab Hill is one of the sites we identify to do the shrimp project. We are really very close to settling a lease agreement with the owners of that land. The lease agreement was sent to them, and they are going through it with their attorneys. All available reservoirs we're prepared to use so that we can provide water for the farmers. But the thing is, with the north of the island, is that we have been reliably informed that there's water down there that we can use, and we did a tour with the Barbados Water Authority with the hope that we would do drilling over there and establish, rather than put reservoirs, we would establish a water supply for the north of the island so that the farmers on that side of the island will have access to water. And we do know as well that there's also water available closer to Spring Hall Land Lease Project. I would let the BADMC give the details of it and the details on the plans for the Crab Hill area in terms of the aquaponics and the aquaculture project.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair. The development of the aquaculture project at Crab Hill, we initially toured that area with a couple of third parties who proposed that the capacity for that area, given its low-lying nature, did contribute to pursuing aquaculture in that location. What we are working towards right now is the development of, again, a pilot there that would potentially utilize above-ground water storage, which would then develop a recirculating aquaculture system, a more water-intense, but not reliant per se on pulling from the ground, the aquifer underground. The idea there is to, considering how sensitive that area in terms of access to water is for the farmers, we're just trying to find a way to balance that approach whilst introducing the aquaculture. That pilot is now set to be designed. We're just getting the costings of the tanks and the like. So by, I would think, within 2 months or so, we would have a full structure that we could put forward to Cabinet and to the Minister for consideration. In relation to the access to water, the catchment that you mentioned, the pond right next door to the Spring Hall Land Lease, what would have been formerly the shop there, that building and the location there is within the BADMC's property, so it is something that we can consider. What we were trying to establish, given the cost of developing catchments, even if it is an already formed pond, there is still a fair bit of construction costs associated. So as the Minister mentioned, working with the BWA, we're just trying to complete that exploration and determination of if additional water could be pulled from the Mount Poya area to start with, but also too, there is exploration of a area I think is referred to as Swampy Town, just trying to identify if in fact we can pull water from those two locations to supplement what's happening at Spring Hall, as well as at Mount Poya. So I think, not that they can't happen simultaneously, but we're just trying to make sure that whilst we work through the costs of both options, we choose the most effective and long-term solution as well. But definitely the catchment there was something that was considered, and we believe there is capacity there, but as I said, there's still a capital cost to develop. So we just want to compare the options so that we can make a final determination. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Michael, South Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Minister, I want to associate myself with the comments made earlier by some of the other honourable members about the performance of the sector, about the dedication that you and your team have shown to the sector, and that the importance that the government has clearly placed on renewing agriculture as the original economic sector. and also as a source of securing people's livelihoods and well-being. I was going to start off by saying that you're one of my favorite ministries, but then I discovered that you waited until I had left. I had given up responsibility for town planning to decide that comments only had to go as far as the chief agricultural officer, which I had been asking for some time. But I'm still encouraged to see that the ministry is orienting itself towards progress and towards efficiency. Now, in that regard, my first question, for which I may have a follow-up or two, has to do with the role of extension officers in the community programs and in the overall strategic objectives of what the ministry has been targeting. I was very interested to hear Ms. Holder talk about nutritional quality. So you're not just talking about yield, but you're trying to make sure that we are targeting nutritional quality. But I understand, Minister, that the number of extension officers in both the ministry proper and BA DMC, I believe, has fallen as an overall total. I'm concerned about that. And I hear the narrative about replacing extension officers with the technology, but I'm also concerned about that. Meaning to say, there is a notion, and I see you shaking your head, so that's good, but meaning to say that there's a notion that you can send out a video showing somebody how to do something, and they can watch it and execute it. Now, the farmers are your constituents as a ministry, so you know that where we are today in 2023, that is not the case. It is not the case for many established farmers, and it is not the case for people who are interested in farming. In many cases, you have to get to people. You have to be able to look at what is happening with a particular plant. You have to be able to look at the leaf and see, well, is this a particular challenge that you're having? You have to be able to show techniques. What is the plan for this challenge that you're having with the number of extension officers? Because, you know, I found myself about to say in my day, and that's very telling, but when I was younger, we had environmental health officers, we had extension officers, people coming around to homes and communities and checking to make sure everything was good. And in a country the size of Barbados, I don't think that is an overinvestment of resources. There are things that you have to leave home for. There are things that you have to get out on the ground and look at and look for. So can you say a bit about what is the plan to increase the number, perhaps back to where we were, or at least to some objective of a number of officers per parish or per number of farmers and so on?
Thank you, Honourable Member, and thank you for your kind remarks. Yes, we do have a plan in place. As a matter of fact, we're working with a consultant. Since this is the area of the Chief Agriculture Officer, I will let her address it. But yes, we really do have a plan in place to address this issue.
Thank you, Honourable Member. First off, let me say that extension agents are really educators who are translating science for the public, for farmers. And they're engaging farmers, homeowners, the general public to act and prepare for a better life using agriculture and things related to that. And extension officers play an important role. I always say that extension officers are to farmers what the Apple iStore is to consumers, because most people would not have an iPhone if you didn't have an iStore that you could have gone to and get help with it. So they are a critical and important cog in the wheel of moving the science of agriculture and putting it into practical, real terms and allow farmers to be able to take it and run with it. So research without that you're not going to get that diffusion of the innovation. And that's one of the things that has hampered us, yes, in the past and currently, because what we have been seeing is that the staff within the ministry, we have been losing staff to retirement. The average age in the ministry for a lot of staff is quite high up in the 50s and 60s now. So this has certainly been a challenge, as Minister Ware has indicated. We have engaged a consultant to help us look at how we are going to redesign the extension program. Now, having said that, we also have to look at extension in the context of a changing world. So we do want to use the technology. There are tools that we are working now to develop that would allow farmers to have more real-time access. So not that it would replace it, but now you have extension has another tool available to them to be able to not only provide the hands-on service that is needed to guide farmers and to guide communities, but also to allow them to have the opportunity late at night, early in the morning, to learn at their own pace and have access to the information that they need to make decisions right at their fingertips. So in developing the new extension program, we have to look at, first of all, we are expanding the areas of agriculture into new areas, so we have to look at developing curricula and support for farmers around those things, such as aquaculture and protective agriculture, et cetera. And then we also have to look at making sure that we help farmers with the adoption of the technology so that they can be more efficient. So it's not just, okay, here's some technology, go ahead and use it, but there has to be connection from one place to the other. So it is a process that we are looking at, and we need to engage with our farming community to determine what are their needs and how we are going to help them with the transition. So this is the work that is being done, and yes, we are losing extension agents, but it also gives us an opportunity now in developing new training programs, and also in terms of part of the youth succession planning that is needed to start now to bring in new persons to be able to develop that succession plan and have the transfer of knowledge. Thanks.
Thanks very much. This is a follow-up question that is related to the specific community-based programs that were discussed earlier. Now, I know you have Project CARE, you have the FEED program. There was another acronym that the Chief Agricultural Officer made reference to that I don't recall at this time. But I do see that there are efforts at engagement, notwithstanding the fact that you have to ramp up the numbers and the methodologies that you use in your extension program. But I did hear, I think it was Mr. Innes suggest that you had trained 880 in the FEED program, but there was maybe 200 and something, I don't remember if the number was 240 something that had received land. And I know this to be a fact, not necessarily the figures, but I know that there is a real gap between the numbers trained and the people who are actually able to begin because of the fact that they have not received land, because several in St. Michael's South Central that came hot, sweaty, and excited to the FEED program to be trained now cannot follow up because they have not received land. Similarly, with respect to Project CARE, I don't think that these proceedings are for the purposes of getting too minute. But I have to make reference to a specific community because we call the name of this community for other things, but I want us to understand that if we want to see changes in certain communities, that we also have to invest in them. Now, I think it was the Project CARE program that encouraged us to identify a plot for community farming, and that plot that was identified by some of the young people in my constituency was in the Marl Hole Halls Road area. There's a group of young men who have a lot that they want to, they had already started without being asked, but they wanted to be able to continue. What they received through the Project CARE by way of inputs, let me put it this way. It would mean that one man could do the forking and another man might be able to sprinkle with the hose, but I'm not so sure what the other 8 people would be doing. Because the level of investment, the quantity of the inputs, I don't think that I would be able to go and face a group of young people in my community with that level of inputs for a community farming program. I link this to the question of extension officers because similarly, they do have some knowledge of what to do to get things to grow, but they would similarly need some help in making sure that this project is as successful as it could be. And I regret to tell you that that help was not forthcoming. I called the name of the community, and I am specific on this occasion, not in order to air any dirty laundry, because Minister, you know that you and I have a solid relationship in terms of making sure that our communities benefit from this sector. But because I want us to understand how the fine work makes a difference, because the project has really not taken off. And I really want to understand because we are talking to the people of Barbados, and I want people to understand what may have been the challenges, what may be the options, for them to hear what are the prospects to make sure that this is something that they are able to benefit from.
Thank you, Honourable Member, and thanks for raising it. Let me get the BADMC to respond, and if it is not them, the BAMC, because you may very well have a case where it's one or the other. So let me get them to respond, and then what I can assure you is that a team will visit the area and we will have this project moving.
Thank you, Honourable Member. First off, I would want to render an apology to the community group in that if they have not been adequately served, I would want to make sure that they are. We do have an officer who is assigned and working across all of the constituencies and has been engaging. And so if there is a scenario where inadequate support is being provided, we would want to address that. And I think the Minister just made the point. I would try to make sure that we have that engagement happen straight away. In relation to community groups, though, I think I would just need to perhaps offline have a bit of clarity as to what has been provided, because there is a structure that has been developed in conjunction with the CARE Committee as to what happens where you have individual versus church groups, community groups, etc. So there's a bit of a difference in terms of how we cater to each group, because you recognize that you're working as a group, you can't have a single fork, etc. So I would want to perhaps have that conversation separate so that we could try to make sure that we address that, but there is definitely a structure that we would want to ensure to engage and facilitate.
Thank you for that. Your response makes a lot of sense. Mr. Chairman, this is my final follow-up on my first question. And it relates to the issue of we're doing this community outreach and engagement for nutrition security and quality. And at the same time, you as a ministry have a partnership with other ministries that have nutrition, in particular the Ministry of Health, as their focus. But I am wondering whether we are using the engagement, the extension to people and community groups to reinforce some of the nutrition messages that we also want to reinforce. Now, one hates to vary from the perspective of the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, the Honourable Prime Minister, but the notion that there are particular things that we need in our context, that we need to originate for our context. We were having a discussion about the the notion of being able to count calories, to know the nutritional content of food, of the food that we're eating. The truth is, Minister, that I track my calories and my macronutrients in something called MyFitnessPal. I don't want it to be an ad for anybody else. But if I were to go in here today and show you that I could put in cassava, flying fish, I could even put in a beef and potato roti from Chefette, and I will find the nutritional information and the quality. Now, it might be useful, perhaps for some person in the private sector to develop such an app for the Caribbean context, but my point is to say that there's a lot that already exists that we can build on, and in fact, we may want to have a project that goes into the existing information or the existing apps to verify the information. But I wanted to ask you about how you are engaging with people while you are out in the field talking about nutritional quality and yield and so on, to also reinforce these messages about nutrition and health, especially to the extent that it can permeate communities. Because I think that is an important opportunity, but not just to communicate with them at that level, but also to do the kind of information gathering about these same foods that we can then plug into existing platforms so people can know what they're eating and how it is nourishing them.
Thanks, Honourable Member, and that's a good question. You would have heard me speaking over and over and over about harmonization between ministries. I think a lot of this really, the heavy lifting, will be done by the Ministry of Health and Wellness, but the Ministry of Agriculture will do the analytics, so that the two ministries will work together. As a matter of fact, this also includes the Ministry of Education, because you may recall when you were in Cabinet, I brought a paper to Cabinet which deals with SDG 2, Parliamentary Fronts Against Hunger. And that work was being done through stakeholders, the Diabetics Association, the Cancer Society, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health and Wellness, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Commerce. And that work, I must admit to you, since COVID, we haven't really done a lot with it. But that is where we will seek to get that kind of approach to provide what you are asking about. It is not there right now, but we can get there once we start back with the Parliamentary Fronts Against Hunger, determining which ministry will carry the anchoring of which component of it, and we will do the analytics.
Thank you. I'd like to move quickly to an issue that was raised before, which has to do with the use of drones and the predial larceny legislation and so on that you have brought to this honorable chamber and that now needs to be executed and realized and implemented. I will have to tell you that my specific interest is more on the livestock side. My mother was a small farmer, is a small farmer, but she did more of it in my younger years. But I don't seem to be able to get many things to grow unless they, as we would say, have eyelashes. I tend to more be able to get animals to grow than plants. And so I tend to have a particular interest in livestock. Minister, you are also aware that I have also had certain experiences directly with this issue with respect to predial larceny and the extent to which it can devastate investments that farmers have made. And in particular, given your efforts to revive black belly sheep farming, and I made a lot of notes when Dr. McLean was talking because I tend to have some perspectives on it and the extent to which you seem to want to hold on to a certain purity in the stock that we may not be able to get back to, and we may need to start to release. But that's another conversation. I am not sure, and perhaps you can explain to me, how we intend to use drones in circumstances where people are stealing livestock, people are taking livestock to another site and slaughtering livestock. How do we foresee that we will be able to use and enforce through the use of this technology? Because I see the intent, but the practical application, I do have a curiosity about.
Yeah, you're correct. Jones won't deliver for you in this regard. But we are doing a program with the FAO, which is a program where we will have chips for traceability. And that is then going to call on the consciousness of all Barbadians, including those who purchase from farmers, where we would then be able to trace animals to a large extent through the chipping system. I believe Dr. Trotman was working with the FAO on this project, and he can give you some more details on it.
Thank you very much. This is Dr. Mark Trotman, Chief Veterinary Officer. We have been engaging the FAO over the past several months in developing an animal identification and traceability program for the country. First starting with the black-belly sheep as a pilot project, which should be rolled out within the next month or two, where these animals are going to be identified and a central database will be generated, and their movements or their movement from one location to the other right up through slaughter is recorded so that we know from birth right through slaughter, and the owner or the responsible person for that animal. That will help considerably in tracking the identity of the owner and tracking the animal. What will happen going forward is we should be able to piggyback that onto a full-fledged food safety traceability system where we can actually identify the meat, trace it right back to the live animal and the farm that it originated from. But within the context of trade predial larceny, the program will allow us to be able to trace these animals. It may not necessarily solve all of the problems, and I do know that there have been incidents of site slaughter, of field slaughter, animals being picked up. That's going to be very difficult to trace if they're not in the system. However, those animals will not be able to get into a proper food safety system. So these would be people slaughtering and backyard slaughtering essentially and consuming the animals. They won't enter any kind of large-scale commercial enterprise because they wouldn't be allowed to do so under any inspection program. We're hoping to also have these animals, the tagging or the procedure for identifying these animals will be by a microchip, which adds another layer of detection where these animals can be picked up, not necessarily through remote identification as you see in the movies and so on, but although that may very well happen in the future. But at least these animals will be electronically identified. It wasn't just be a numerical tag attached to these animals. So that pretty much is how we plan to at least do some work towards identifying and combating some of the predial larceny issues in livestock. Thank you.
Thanks for that. My last question on this occasion relates to the medicinal cannabis sector. When we were doing the work some years ago to start to revision the Barbados economy, this sector was to be one of the stars. There has been a lot of intervening conversation about other treatments with respect to cannabis, and I understand why. I understand that there are all kinds of other considerations and other populations that are interested in the conversation. But I would like to hear from you, Minister, and your team about where we are with this sector. I understand that there are cross-border financial issues that attend. But I am also mindful that we've established certain targets and floors for investment in this sector. As I pointed out when we were discussing the energy sector, that notion of 30% local ownership is a target for the energy sector. I wanted to know on that occasion whether it is being reached or whether we're on the way. And similarly, with respect to medicinal cannabis, where are we? What levels of investment can we expect? What is the size of this sector that we forecast in terms of how much it can really generate wealth for Barbadians? I'm assuming we are not talking about the bulk commodity export, because we took a decision to step away from that when we decided we wanted a different relationship with sugar. And also how are we tracking, and are we tracking, and is there this, are we getting towards this 30% local ownership? I really would like to understand where we are, what are the prospects, in particular in this financial year, and perhaps forecast for the medium term, the next 3 or 4 years. Thank
you, Honourable Member. I know we have seen some uptake in activity at the BMCLA. After a protracted period of people not showing interest because they weren't sure of the investment climate. A lot has changed since then, and there is a lot of activity taking place. The acting CEO can speak to that, and the chairman can also speak to the activity that's taking place in terms of approvals that have come to the board.
Thank you so much, Honourable Member. So what we have seen in the past couple of years is that, yes, medicinal cannabis was allowed to be legal in Barbados, but a lot of things would have happened in the intervening years. As we've stepped into this globally, a lot of the persons who would have put in their application.
You are known to some of us. For the record of the House, please introduce yourself.
Apologies.
As is the order.
Apologies. I am Senator Shanika Roberts-Odell. I'm the current acting CEO of the Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority. Thank you, sir. So what has in fact happened is a lot of those persons would have put a pause on their interest in terms of coming in, considering COVID, considering a lot of the global financial outcomes that would have happened at that point in time. A lot of that interest has reheated, one may consider that term, and we have continued to process through applications at a significantly increased pace. We have currently 2 licensees representing 8 licenses who are active, so to speak. We have also had another 12 licenses that have been approved by the board and are currently in the process. While the country has recovered, and in a lot of ways the global outlook has recovered as it relates to COVID, a lot of these licensees are still in the process of recovering, and a lot of these applicants are still in the process of recovering. However, they are all very, very reinvested and here towards getting their license and getting their facility up and running. As it relates to the 30% ownership, I am very, very happy to say that that is indeed achieved as it relates to our applications. There are no applications that we have before us that do not include the 30% ownership for Barbadians in this country. And I am extremely happy to say that. In some cases, it's far more than 30% ownership in Barbadians. In some cases, it's 50. Some cases, it's an entirely Barbadian-owned enterprise. So we have definitely been able to achieve that versus a lot of other territories which that hasn't been able to be significantly achieved. So I've been very happy on that point. As it relates to our outlook for me is very, very good. This year, my anticipation is that we have at least 12 of these licensees that are coming on board with having their facility up and running. We currently already have a facility up and running. There is cannabis grown in Barbados currently, medicinal cannabis grown in Barbados currently. There is a retail distribution facility that should be coming on board as well. But the outlook, economic outlook as it relates to that is very, very good. I want to say from the authority's perspective, we only receive license fees every 5 years. The license is for a 5-year period. Most of the economic reverbers you're going to see is in the licensees, in them hiring persons, in them being able to sell their product and to be able to, generate income in that area.
Thanks. The only final follow-up really on that question is to be able to get something more quantitative in terms of the size of the sector, because I hear 2 licensees responsible for 8 licenses and 12 in the process. But I wanted to know whether there is a general sense of what is the scale of economic activity that this sector can be expected to generate. I don't want you to pull out your calculator, but just to give a general idea of whether we can, what I'm getting at is, can we count on this sector to be one of the real pillars of growth, as are other parts of agriculture, as is tourism, as is energy? I'm just trying to get a sense of whether that is the case in your estimation.
I can say in my estimation, we intend to be one of those legs under the table. The reality, if you're looking for, I'm glad you don't want me to pull out my calculator, but I can say that I can speak in terms of what are the size of the facilities that you're looking at, and I can speak in terms of what those are intending to do. So we have 6 cultivators, right? So there's 4 tier 1, that's an acre and under, and 2 tier 2, which is between 1 and 5 acres in the facility, right? So each of those facilities is allowed to produce at any one point in time at least 3,000 plants per acre. So there's some that can have 6,000 at any one time on their facility. Again, I can't tell you in terms of their output because that depends on what exactly they're growing. What strain are you growing depends on what is your outlook, what is your turnover point for your product on the market. I can tell you we have 2 processor facilities, that's tier 1 processors. So we will be able to take that product, be able to manufacture that into various kinds of products. Those particular applicants have submitted the kind of products that they're looking to create, and they, at least in one of those cases, they have already advised and shown us where their markets are and their relationships within Europe towards selling that product. There are 3 retail distributors, and those will be therapeutic facilities established in Barbados to be able to service locals and tourists alike. 3 import, 2 export, 1 research and development, and 2 transport facilities, licensees. So the reality is it's an ecosystem in truth, because no one person necessarily, unless you're a vertically integrated company, but most aren't vertically integrated. So they're going to rely on another licensee to be able to transport and another licensee be able to import as it related to the specific strains or seeds that they may be able to cultivating, and another licensee towards exportation. Additionally, our shape is not solely based on agricultural. There's also the Barbados Drug Service, which has responsibility for, after these are products, for the approval of those particular products and verifying that those products are good for consumption as it relates to medicinal consumption, if we're talking about medical products. So the size is not merely agriculture, it's also in that end of product sales. But again, we are new. We have just started seeing product grown in Barbados and being able to hit the markets, and that will grow and change based on what those individual business persons choose to do. We've been very careful about staying out of the business end and allowing persons to make decisions that make sense for them in terms of what strains they're growing, what products they're producing, and where they're selling those products.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will come back on a second round.
If I may add, though, just for us to understand really where the medicinal cannabis industry is. Today, the industry is at 16.7 billion and is set to grow to 24.4% by 2023 to 2030. So the industry does present a real good opportunity for participation. It's a question of how we attract the type of investment that's going to give us a footprint right there. And that is of most importance to us. What it is that we are really getting into, we're getting into an industry that works just like tourism. We know that the tourism stats state that globally, the tourism industry will generate X amount, and therefore, once you're in there, you can develop a footprint that gives you a chance to participate. Similarly with medicinal cannabis, I think the challenge that we face here, and this is what I thought you would have raised, is that we have to find space for those Barbadians who, similar to what we did with the sugar industry, where we were able to create a space for sugar to continue when the preferential treatment was taken away, to allow for the economic activity to take place and to allow people to continue to participate. What we're looking at is a similar approach to the medicinal cannabis industry, where we can allow for growers to grow and then have a processing opportunity for people to process. And then based on those products, you can have your spas, you can have all the different value addeds, and then the opportunity for transportation will kick in, and the opportunity for the masseuse and those who provide the treatments as well, to grow out an industry that provides opportunities beyond the cannabis itself in order for people to participate. And I think that is where you're probably getting at. I don't have the quantitative information, but you can see from an economic standpoint where the opportunities will be.
Thanks, Minister. That is what I did raise when I asked about the notion that we stay away from the bulk commodity approach and that we make sure that we can create an industry for people to participate. And also what I was getting at when I talked about the 30% local stake, because we may say local ownership, meaning in companies, in who are the directors, but I think that when we talk about local ownership, we are really talking about local stake in a sector. And it's something that we need to build out. But I thank you and your team for being able to show Barbadians that there is space here and that you will continue to try and provide that space. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central. Honourable Member for St. James South.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to start by congratulating the team at the Ministry of Agriculture. I have watched and observed the number of things that you are doing, and I know that these things are extremely transformative for Barbados. And I really look forward to the continued success of the different initiatives that you're doing. So, congrats. The Ministry of Agriculture, we've partnered a lot within foreign trade. We partner in relation to business to help take Barbados forward in terms of the development of agriculture. And one of the areas in which you are critical to the country is in the development of trade, and when it comes to imports and exports. On the import side, I know that we have been trying to focus on promoting trade within the CSME to be able to work with Guyana, Suriname, and we also want to see some work being done with the OECS, because the continued viability of those economies are critical to Barbados because we export a number of goods and services to them. So part of the remit you have is to participate in helping us in relation to the ease of doing business. We've signed a number of trade agreements that mandate that we remove a lot of the obstacles that may delay imports, etc. And I know you're part of a general ecosystem that is trying to speed up. I want to ask you to share with the Chamber and with the country, though, the challenges you have in that area, because at the end of the day, while speed is important, being accurate and safeguarding the border is critical. So if you could share your role in the ease of doing business at both the airport and seaport, and what you would want us, the general public, to understand about that process.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Actually, we were working with Customs on a program to help us to be able to develop a trusted trader program. Michael James, who is the person heading that area, can speak in details to what is happening and where we are at in terms of the ease of doing business at the seaport and the airport.
Hi, good afternoon. Michael James, Plant Pathology, Plant Protection, Ministry of Agriculture. It's a very interesting question, ma'am. It is not only about, I think most Bajans, when they hear about free trade, they think it means just everything just free up. You can just go and trade willy-nilly. It's not like that. There's some measure of responsibility, both on the Ministry of Agriculture as well as persons trading with bringing in produce, or for that extent, exporting. So with respect to what the minister was saying, the Customs does have a trusted traders program, but both myself and my colleague, Dr. Trotman, we look at different things. They're about, yes, if this thing has in, is it what it's supposed to be? So let's say it's oranges, yes, it's oranges. Our remit is basically look at the risk that set of oranges or that meat might pose to Barbados. Okay, so it's kind of different in that person might say, okay, but if Customs pass it, well, you are looking at it because they're different risks. You cannot see, you cannot x-ray an orange and see if it has a virus. It's impossible to do it, at least not yet, all right? You can't x-ray a piece of wood and see if there's a particular bacterium that's in there. So we look at different sets of risk, and in some respects, that makes it a bit more difficult, and you're not going to get your product or produce or commodity, and I mean, we get spanked sometimes, but we are trying to, at the end of the day, trying to protect the biodiversity within Barbados. So if sometimes we say, okay, we have to inspect, or you cannot enter, or you cannot come in without what we call a pest risk analysis. So therefore, if you want to import anything, we go through what we call due diligence. So we want to know, where is it coming from? What are the pests associated with that particular product from the exporting country? Do we have a similar pest? If we do, is it something under control? If it's not, then we'll say, well, look, these are the conditions you have to put in place in order to protect the borders of Barbados. So there are a number of different things we're looking at, both at the seaport and the airport. We will work with our colleagues in Ministry of Health, as well as my colleague within veterinary quarantine, to ensure that whatever comes in meets the standards, not only nationally, but meets the standards that protects the Barbados border. And sometimes that might mean that the protected commodity would have to be destroyed, or we would not allow it to come in. That is par for the course. I mean, when we export, we also go through that sort of procedure. And I tell you, a number of times we get a number of documents coming back to us telling us, oh, well, you know, Barbados, you sent this thing, should not have come. We're not sending it back, it has been destroyed. That is par for the course. But our remit is we're here to facilitate, but part of facilitation means sometimes we have to say no.
Thank you very much. I've had a wonderful education from you in terms of all the things that you have to do in terms of examining the geographical areas and so on. I never really realized how much went into it until we had that session a few months ago. And I believe that at one point we'd had an issue with one of our CARICOM neighbors feeling that we had rejected some produce and felt that Barbados was not open for business. But I know since then you would have done some work in making sure they understand that we are open for business. So I really thank you for that, because the trade is important. My second question, Chair, would be on the other side, where we want to look at export. And this is very important to Barbados because over the years we've signed a number of trade agreements, whether it is the EPA with the UK, the EPA with the EU, and we also have the Treaty of Chaguaramas, and we've got some bilaterals, etc. And one of the challenges we have had, especially with the UK and EU EPA, is access to their market because of the sanitary and phytosanitary issues that govern their trade. And being able to get into those markets has been difficult in the past because we've not had the SPS and we've not had the labs. This is particularly distressing because I remember one particular exporter here in Barbados who has probably one of the best products worldwide as far as I'm concerned, was unable to export their product into the UK and the EU, even when they use inputs from those countries. They were not allowed to export. And we know how much a barrier to trade that can be, which limits how much money we can earn and therefore limit the opportunities for other people to get jobs, etc., and for us to earn foreign exchange. So if you could just update us, I know some work has been done on the SBS. I've been one of your fans sitting in the stands cheering you on as you sought to put the SPS legislation in place. And I would also like to ask you to speak towards the issue of the labs. Where are we in relation to having the facility to be able to ensure that we are meeting the standards of other countries, that we can begin to push in terms of trade via Ministry of Industry, etc., and our missions abroad?
Thank you, Honourable Member. We have 3 officers here who are actually leading this project, Dr. Beverly Wood, Dr. Mark Trotman, and Mr. Michael James. And I would love for the 3 of them, starting with Dr. Wood, to speak to this, given the fact that we have already passed 2 pieces of legislation and are waiting on the 3rd piece. And then the 3 of them can speak to the importance of having this legislation in place, what it would do for us to be able to export, and also the labs that are required in order for us to make a difference.
Good afternoon. I'm Beverly Wood. I'm Director of Government Analytical Services, which is a laboratory. I'm also working on the SBS issues. As the Minister said, and you would have known, there are 3 pieces of legislation that form what we call the Agricultural Health and Food Control System. That is the Food Safety Bill, which directs the quality and safety of food. There's also the Plant Protection Bill and the Animal Health and Veterinary Public Health Bill. We had 3 draft pieces of legislation, and as you know, that in December, both the Plant Protection and the Animal Health bills were passed in Parliament. The 3rd piece, the Food Safety Bill, we have just gotten some comments back from the Ministry of Health, and we will be passing those comments on to the CPC, because when the draft bills were sent to CPC, they sent us back asking us some queries that they had. And we as a team had looked at it, and as I said, Health has finalized some of their comments, so that will be going back to CPC for their further work. There will be some amendments and so that would need to be made. So when they have completed that, they will send it back to us for us to review. And then that process will continue until we've agreed that the bill really addresses the areas that we want. Once those 3 pieces of legislation are passed, that is not the only thing that is required when a country wants to export or re-import commodities from a country. There's also the regulations, which are the enforcement procedures that need to take place. And what I should say that the bills or the legislation we had before was a reactive one, in that an officer may go and examine something and then find that there's a problem and ask that it be put in place. These 3 bills now are preventative in that you put systems in place that persons will have to follow, that you will assure that at the end of the process, the food that is manufactured is safe for the animal, whatever. So the regulations then are enforcing what the act is. It would say, well, we do this, or you have to meet these particular things. And one of the other things that we have to also work on is the operation procedures. So you have the primary piece of legislation, you have the regulations, which are enforcement, and then how do we do business? So a country who wants to import a product from Barbados would want to have that the chief plant protection officer or the animal health officer or the food safety person has a good overview of what is happening on the ground. So before, let's say for food safety, there is no requirement, let's say for a person to have a food safety policy, or that they show they have a hazard plan, hazard analysis critical control point. Those are some of the things that the new piece of legislation will have a requirement. And the onus is on the manufacturer to be able to say that the food that they're producing is safe, and the regulatory agency will inspect or monitor their progress to see really and truly that it is safe. So the three bills, once they're passed, then we are working on some regulations. We have already started on the one for plant protection. There's an import and export regulation, and we are also working on certain requirements that we will put on the ministry's website to say if you're doing business in Barbados, these are the things that you must comply with. With respect to laboratories, as I said, I manage the government analytical services. We do work with respect to microbe in terms of food microbiology. We also do in terms of water quality. And we also do some work with respect to nutritional labeling. There are certain requirements through Codex that there are certain things you must put on your label. In terms of labeling within Barbados, it's not mandatory with respect to nutritional labeling that you have to have a label. In terms, if you want to say that you're making a claim, my product has so much or my product is this, then you have to put that. So we do some things we want to bring on board, and that's what in our estimates are. We put measures in place to add certain other analyses to our suite to be able to complete what the labeling requirement is. There are things in terms of pesticide residues, some work with veterinary drugs. We are hoping to improve our capacity and capability to do so. We have acquired recently new pieces of equipment. Some of it was given to us through the IAEA regional project. We also got some training, but we really need to have persons dedicated to developing that capability with the analytical instruments that we have. So those are some of the areas that we need. In terms to when persons are exporting to a particular market, they need to understand what that market demands of them. In terms of, let's say, pesticides, some countries have a suite of pesticides that they would want you to be able to analyze for, and therefore then we would develop the capability to be able to see what range of pesticides we can analyze for. Those things are complicated analyses, and you have to have persons dedicated. We have the analytical equipment, and by the sometime later this year, we will have another piece with us. And also we are working with a project with the IAEA, a national project, where they can assist us in developing further our capabilities in those areas. So that is what we're dealing with now. As I said, with respect to fish, We are just ending up a program now with funding from the FAO, where we looked at what the traceability system is for Barbados. We've also working on looking at a degradation product that we found in fish, histamine. We've developed the capability for doing that. One of the challenges that we face is that the legislation does not demand persons to do so. So a number of the companies and facilities that send samples to the government analytical services is that they want to do their due diligence. They want to get market acceptance. We are hoping that once the food safety bill and all the other pieces are put in place, there are certain things that will be required of persons, and therefore the samples will come to the laboratory. I hope I've answered your question.
Okay, I'd just like to follow on first the legislation and what it means. We've just, as Dr. Wood mentioned, we've just had the Umbrella Act, which is the Animal Health and Veterinary Public Health Act, passed. We now need to work on specific enabling regulations to be able to enforce the provisions of that legislation. Things such as antemortem and postmortem inspection of meat and meat products, veterinary drug residue or veterinary public health regulations, which will allow us to guarantee that foods of animal origin are safe to eat. There are certain aspects of it that relate to animal welfare as well too. Animal identification and traceability aspects, as I referred to earlier. All these are the components of the umbrella legislation that we now need to drill down into regulations and have those passed so that we have a really robust set of regulations to cover all of the aspects which are demanded by our partners overseas in order for us to access their markets. With respect to the laboratories, now we do have a whole set of designs and proposals for the construction and outfitting of a new veterinary services laboratory. The existing vet lab is not fit for purpose. It is an extremely archaic building that is, for want of a better word, fungus-ridden and rotting. And so we really need to upgrade it and build a new building. It has been put in the estimates for that, so I'm very grateful for that. So that will see us being able to provide, and I must mention that the reason why we need this new laboratory is not just because we need a new laboratory, but because in order for us to be able to provide laboratory support, we need to have an accredited laboratory, one that's recognized internationally to produce results that our partners will recognize as being valid, and we can't do that right now with the existing facility. So the new laboratory that we will build will allow us to produce accredited results recognized by the international community following international standards. And that's certainly another step towards being able to be ready to provide a suite of SPS capacity requirements to export product to our partners. I'm very optimistic that that will be realized within the next year to 2 years. Thank you.
Okay, with respect to plant protection, the legislation, as the minister said, has been passed. We've got a consultant on board right now looking at the regulations, and we would have consulted before. I must say this because, you know, in some parts we heard that they weren't consulted, but that is not true. There were widespread consultations with our stakeholders. The regulations would have had one just on Friday, no, the Tuesday the 28th, looking at the regulations, and that was before our other border protection agencies. And this is something that I need to say because when people hear border protection, they just think about immigration and customs. But border protection is also related to the agriculture as well as health, you know. So persons must take that into consideration when you hear about border protection. With respect to the other part of the regulations, what we're doing is we're going to revamp the manual, the manual that deals with inspections. So we have the plant quarantine manual that's going to be revamped, as well as diagnosis is something that both Beverly and Mark spoke about, very important. If you can't diagnose, especially have some sort of reference diagnosis, then it's very difficult for you to say, well, I don't want that particular product in. So we need to have some measure of diagnostic capability, and that is what they're speaking about. So we are on our way. The new legislation basically made it more international. We went back to international best practices. We aligned ourselves to the IPPC as well as the regional plant protection bill that we also looked at. So it's harmonized to that extent. And we are working again with another part, the electronic single window, where we're going to look at getting what we call electronic phytosanitary certificate, e-phyto, so that will not now be signed and be taken manually. That will be sent directly from country to country, so that you don't have that sort of intermittent persons dealing or trying to steal or trying to pull it one on one another. So all of that is going to be part of the new formation. So you're not only with Asecuda World, electronic single window, e-phyto. So we're trying to get a very tight ship so that all of these things can work in harmony.
What I can also add to is that we will be discussing with the port in terms of the central container examination facility and what we, the plant health, animal and food, would need to have within that facility to be able to examine products that come into Barbados.
It's amazing how with the amateur, the non-agricultural person, you can easily think that all agriculture is to know how to drop a seed in a hole, cover it down and put a little water on it and pray. But I think what the team has shared today shows the level of technical detail and the amount of foundational work that is absolutely necessary to make something like agriculture grow. I would want to say that the success in the SPS, in the labs, and getting the opportunity for export is going to provide opportunity for small farmers to become big farmers, to make farming a fully dignified activity, area where you want to pursue commercial levels of farming. Until we can produce farmers who are earning significantly, we're not going to get enough doing the uptake of land in Guyana or land in Suriname because they want to expand. And the SPS and the other work that you're doing is vital to creating the opportunity for that. My last area is a little parochial. One of the things that I've noted about the work of the ministry is that you're dealing with big macro issues and you're also dealing with the micro issues on the ground in relation to your care program. And the issue of the involvement of the ordinary person. In my constituency, I have a fairly urban, suburban area. But I do have a significant number of people who are interested in agriculture, but they don't have that background. They didn't grow up in the country and saw mommy doing it or daddy doing it, etc. And they're eager to be involved. I wanted to find out, in terms of engaging them, do you have sufficient resources, the issue of equipment, to be able to help each of them as they express that interest? Do you have the resources that are necessary? And I want to ask a follow-up question about if they can grow into, from micro farmers to small farmers to big farmers. I have another question that I want to ask following on.
Right, thank you, Honourable Member. I'll tackle the equipment element first. Obviously, within government, that is always a challenge. But what we have been doing and has been spurred by our PM is looking at how we can work with other state entities, both ministries as well as SOEs, who have equipment and whom we might be able to call on and implement a solution that would give greater coverage and find a way to reach those persons who have that interest. We actually have just drafted an MOU, which we are now starting to share. We're going to try to tackle the ministry itself, the MTW, NCC, those entities who have those pieces of equipment, to try to see how we could work together in a orderly way so that we can identify where they have downtime for those pieces. Their operators may be not necessarily being called on for particular purposes within their work programs, but we would be able to say, okay, well, I have a person in St. James or someone in St. Lucie who requires X. We may be able then to coordinate with them to actually share that work around. So that is an ongoing process. As I said, the MOU is now in the draft form, so we now have to actually elicit the engagement of those entities and seek their buy-in. But that is an active program that we will be pursuing. In relation to the human resource, I think as would have been raised by the other honorable member in relation to our extension staff, I think on Island there are 7 who have that title. Obviously quite a small number in terms of coverage, but I think what we have been working to do, and the CAO and the minister would have spoken to some of the consultancy to build that out. In the interim, we're also looking at using the electronic tools to actually build out some measure of content that can allow for persons to actually participate and have access. As part of the CARE, we've actually engaged with a number of the international agencies, ICA, UNDP, to try to see how they can assist with that building up of the resource. And one of them have actually pledged to develop a number of those, what we would call how-to videos. And that work, I think, is at a very close to being launched point. We had actually hoped to debut it at AgriFest, but that didn't quite work out. But we are hoping within the next few weeks that we can actually launch those videos and start the engagement with persons through that electronic avenue, at least as another step. But obviously still, there's still the need for the human resource as well. So there are going to be multiple layers that we would have to pursue, but the objective would be through CARE, through FEED, through each tier that we are building up within our engagement with the public, to have a mechanism to actually allow them to both reach us, but us to reach them as well. Thank you.
And the last follow-up question flowing out from that, we've been able in St. James South to get a few communities to start community gardens. And one of the things that has emerged from out of that experiment is that people are taking some of the produce and trying to do their own little agro-processing and selling these things. And what it has reminded me is that Barbados really is in deep need of a new generation of healthy snacks that we can put into the schools, we can put on the vendors' trays, that we can encourage people to use in their homes if we're going to beat the NCDs, which we have. I know that your agro-processing unit that does the Carmita range of foods, I use those as well. So I'm just wondering if there are any plans for you to help develop some of these snacks and foods that we can begin to substitute for the highly processed, unhealthy stuff that Barbadians are now imbibing.
No problem. I would say that our Carmitas team, we are looking at how we can, yes, build up the existing products. We have looked at a few new ones as well. There are no firm plans in terms of trying to go back to the stage of facilitating small and micro business in that structure, because I think would have been mentioned, the agri processing facility that was established in by the Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Export Barbados, forgive me, yes. But their facility, I know, is more geared towards helping persons to build up, also to build up at a certain quality level, not simply just, the trial. So if there are persons who want to pursue that, our job would be to try to make sure we can bridge that gap. I think within our facility, we have quite a small space, quite frankly. Even in terms of what we are producing, we're probably going well beyond what the space really ought to be. But we're looking at some programs to build that out, but the capital budget is obviously a limited capacity, so the concentration within that processing plant in Christchurch, I believe, is where we would want to try to funnel people. And as those queries come in, and by all means, if you wish to have persons make contact with us, we would try to put them in touch with BIDC to ensure that they have a way forward if it is truly something they wish to pursue. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. James South. Honourable Senior Minister, St. James Central.
I'm very grateful to you, Mr. Chairman. And I have a couple questions for you, Minister, that I think you might wish to share your thoughts on. We obviously are coming out of a pandemic which severely impacted not only this region, but the entire world. One of the lessons that we learned is the ease with which, for want of a better way of putting it, disease can spread and the damage that it can do to us as human beings. It is obviously not limited only to us as human beings, but it is true of all living organisms that there is this particular vulnerability. Floating around right now in the international community are some concerns about two areas of agricultural interest. First of all, the question of bird flu, and secondly, the question of African swine fever. I would wish to hear what the thoughts of the ministry are on this. Obviously, we have a significant poultry production effort here in Barbados, and equally a significant pork production effort. And I would welcome your thoughts and that of your ministry as to what defensive measures or offensive measures might be taken.
Excellent question, Senior Minister. You may recall that we took a presentation at Cabinet about 2 years ago addressing African swine fever. And at the time, we were able to put some systems in place to address it. I think now is the perfect time for Dr. Trotman to update the country on where we are, and at the same time speak to the issue of bird flu. Bird flu, I know people express concerns about its presence in the United States of America, and I have engaged Dr. Trotman on this, but I believe he will be better placed now to update the country on where we are and how we are managing.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Okay, so first of all, you are quite correct. We are facing two very, very serious animal diseases that are threatening the region. I was able to get Cabinet to agree to take on some additional resources to address, in the first instance, African swine fever. We've created a rapid response team, or a surveillance team, trying to get a handle on the pig production systems in the country, what level they were at with respect to biosecurity and farmers protecting themselves against the risk of entry of African swine fever onto their farms. To that effort, we've done a number of PR releases, videos to educate farmers and to educate the public on it. The team goes out to the community, visiting farms, educating farmers, giving them brochures on what measures they should take to protect themselves. At the end of the day, it is up to the farmer to put measures in place to protect their farm from the entry of the viruses, whether it be bird flu or African swine fever. Creating a database on the farmer, on both the poultry industry and the pork industry as to where there are, what risk factors exist with each farm. Are there landing sites nearby? Are the farmers engaging in feeding swill to their pigs? Are there other types, are there illegal dumps or legal dumps that could harbor scavengers, which could pose a risk to the farms, again, whether it be a poultry farm or a pig farm. Both of these are intensively raised animals, so the methods to keep out viruses to their farms are fairly similar. What we are finding is that there are a number of unregistered people who do not consider themselves farmers. And so therefore do not approach the Ministry of Agriculture, do not approach us, the veterinary services, for assistance or support because they think they're not a farmer. Because they have a couple of pigs in their backyard, they're not a farmer. And so we are finding the community outreach that we're doing, going from community to register and map. We're putting mapping GPS points on each of these farms so we have a good overview of where they are, not only so that we can identify them, but in the event of an outbreak, we can map it and identify how the disease can possibly spread from there outwards. So it's both for the farmers' protection and for the industry's protection. So these are some of the things that we are doing right now. We have found we have well over 1,500 pig holding areas, which were a lot more than we thought there were countless numbers. I don't have the exact numbers. The poultry industry, obviously, they're such a diverse group of farmers. You have your commercial entities, you have your smallholders, you have your backyard farmers. So they're so diverse, and each of them has to have a tailored approach in terms of what they can do to protect their farms. On the prevention of entry front, we are doing some monitoring of landing sites because the bird flu, or highly pathogenic avian influenza, to use the correct term, this particular outbreak seems to be transmitted through migratory birds, which is a little different from the previous episodes of HPAA that have occurred globally in the past, which makes it a totally different beast to deal with. So we have sentinel sites. We are monitoring sentinel sites where wild birds come into the country. Barbados, as you know, is right in the middle of the Atlantic flyway, birds traveling south in the winter, and they do rest in landing sites in Barbados. And that poses a risk for entry of the disease into the country. So sentinel sites and monitoring those landing sites becomes important. So if we do get birds that are potentially coming in, we can pick that up, making sure that farmers are aware when they're protecting their, putting in biosecurity measures on their farms, that they protect their poultry from the entry of wild birds. We don't want wild birds nesting in the rafters of the poultry houses, because that could very much be a risk factor. And then with respect to the importation of pork and pork products and poultry products, we have had to, as the need arises, put restrictions in place to prevent the entry of the virus, because both viruses, in addition to being transmitted via live animals, can also enter through pork products or poultry products. So fresh, frozen, chilled pork products, fresh, frozen, chilled poultry products, even cured or smoked pork products can transmit the virus as well too. So as the need arises and outbreaks become extended within certain countries, we put restrictions to prevent it from entering through passenger baggage, through commercial entries, while still doing our best to safeguard a certain level of trade. We're trying to take a more surgical approach to this rather than an outright ban on all poultry products or all pork products from every country. And so we've done that quite successfully with countries such as the United States and Canada. We're looking to try and do it with the UK as well, to a more surgical approach, where we can still facilitate some level of trade while making sure that products which are potentially infected with the virus doesn't enter the country. So these are some of the things that we have been doing in the interim to try and safeguard the country from entry of these viruses.
And thank you, but let me just go a little bit further then, because it may be me, and I confess that I am now doing 18-hour days, 7 days a week, so I perhaps do not have enough time to listen to the airwaves and so on and so forth. But are we satisfied that we're doing enough to alert the people in the farming community? And I noted that at one point you indicated that there's some level of expectation that some of the need to guard against this lies with the individual farming effort. But are we doing enough, in your judgment, to alert people to this general concern, first of all, and secondly, to assist those persons who are registered as official farmers and even those who are just trying a thing? Because there are a lot of people who are trying a thing. But if I follow it correctly, all you need to do is to have it within the stock of your birds or the stock of your swine, for it to then start to spread almost like wildfire through a small community like Barbados. So are we doing enough, in your judgment, to strengthen the capacity to protect individual farmers? And if so, please tell me a little bit about what exactly you're doing to satisfy yourselves that this is in fact enough.
Okay, I don't think we can ever say that we're doing enough to alert the farmers and to alert the industry about the risk. We're doing what we can. We have, as I said, put out some PSAs on certainly on the African swine fever. As I said before, we are trying to do a lot of community work, going into farms, going into communities. We often find when we target one community and we go into a listed farm, the officers, in addition to discussing with the farmer what they need to do to protect themselves, they usually will ask the question, are there any other people in the neighborhood who have pigs or who have poultry? And that usually cascades into a number of more people who we can identify. I think the best thing that we're doing right now is that one-on-one collaboration, the one-on-one discussion that we're having with the community. We want to do a lot more electronic work in terms of web-based work, in terms of broadcasting information. We're working on that with our IT officer to have a website which will allow us to broadcast a lot more information. We have been working with the Public Affairs Unit in producing interviews and videos and so on. That's kind of lapsed a little bit because of other demands and other interests, but these are also some of the things that we have been doing and will continue to do going forward.
Mr. Chairman, I want to turn the attention of the House to matters now of foreign exchange earnings through this sector. And you might have expected, Minister, that I would come there because that's the oversight remit that I have. And clearly agriculture is part of our productive sector. Now, I begin by congratulating you and your team sincerely because I think this is a transformative period that we are going through. We've already had a question that spoke to this issue of transformation in a very man-on-the-street way, because it's all right for us to sit in this isolated area and talk about how it is transformative, but people out there must feel it. It must be a lived reality. One of the things that I recognize is slowly but certainly taking place, but of which I think your ministry may be guilty of hiding your light under the bushel, is this matter of diversification of agriculture into a zone where we have never really seriously gone in Barbados before. We've had people who keep bees in this country. But if you ask the average Barbadian what is apiculture, they ain't really going to be able to speak sensibly to it for 5 minutes. And the involvement in apiculture and the potential of this place being the home or party to being the regional hub of a honey exchange, again, would be beyond the immediate reach of the average member of the public. I know that your ministry is working on this, and I feel I should give you or invite you to take the opportunity to speak a little bit to this because, again, this is transformative in a very man-on-the-street way and is full of opportunity for small businesses to develop, commercial trade to evolve, and foreign exchange for the country to come from a brand new source in sums that might previously be unimaginable. And I want you, therefore, to elaborate, please, Minister.
Thank you, Senior Minister. The Honey Exchange project is being handled by Export Barbados. in collaboration with the Ministry of Agriculture. We have, though, an apiculture project where we've been producing honey, and Mr. Brett Taylor is the officer that's responsible for making sure that is developed within the ministry. And equally at the BA, DMC as well, farmers coming out of the feed program don't only take land. Some of them are also taking boxes to do apiculture. So there are two areas, but at the end of the day, is one apiculture project that the country is doing. And then the honey exchange is gonna be taken care of by export. So I would have loved to have Mark here today, actually, to be able to address the issue of the honey exchange, because I anticipated it coming. But the issue of apiculture, for sure, we are gonna be able to give you some details on it. Mr. Taylor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Currently, the apiculture program at the Ministry of Agriculture, name is Brett Taylor, Senior Agricultural Officer at the Ministry of Agriculture. Currently, the apiculture program at the Ministry of Agriculture seeks to provide training to householders, to hobbyists about apiculture. We have trained a number of persons over the last 4 years in apiculture. However, some of those persons have not taken up a lot of the training in that they are not currently utilizing some of the training that we provided. Over the years, we trained approximately 366 persons in apiculture. And of those, we also provided kits to persons. We had about 45 young persons, youth that we trained, that we did training with, and they were provided with complete kits on rain honey. And I'm sorry to say that out of those 45, only 14 are currently active. So there has been a slow uptake in apiculture. There has been challenges to persons who have done it. During that time, as was mentioned previously, we had Hurricane Elsa, we had the ash fall, we had even periods of drought, and then last year we had periods where we had lots of rain, and some of these factors affect the reign of bees and the production of honey. We have, over the years, had a population of about 738 hives in the country, and that is basically from about 81 active beekeepers. So this has been that has been the maximum that we've achieved so far. Going forward, we need to put things in place that we can get more people to be actively involved in it. What I must say is that it is still basically a hobbyist enterprise. Only a few of those 81 beekeepers actually do it full time. And there's one beekeeper who probably has about 200 hives himself. So the rest of the hives are spread across the other 80 or so beekeepers that we have in the island. We have also tried, there are certain factors that we have looked at. The bees that we have here can be aggressive. That is a fact. And we may need then to bring in some foreign bees. We may need to bring in some new queens. So we may need to bring in queens that are not as aggressive and that are high producers here into Barbados, and that would be a factor of how we go about it, based with Dr. Trotman from the vet. So these are some of the things that we have to look at so that we can improve the industry in Barbados. Thank you.
If I could just go into the follow-up to this question, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Minister, would it then mean then that you would be looking to broaden the scope of beekeepers in the island? And you can respond. I notice your head is nodding in the affirmative, but that cannot be communicated to the House. The broaden the scope of beekeepers, first of all, and secondly, would it also mean that this is a business opportunity for persons who are interested in the development of these bees for the purpose of getting the honey? Because if you connect it to a honey exchange, you're then talking about selling and trading honey at commercial volumes. And that can be done even globally, regionally and globally.
Yes, there's an opportunity, definitely, for people to participate, but this is a process that is going to take a little while, and we're going to have to do a joint arrangement between CARICOM in order for us to be able to develop a honey exchange. The truth is that what I've found is that there are people who participate when we make the announcements, but then the pace at which they want to move, some things don't give them that pace. Beekeeping is one, and therefore you will find that they may drop off. Others will come, but they don't stay the course. So this definitely has to be a joint effort between us and CARICOM. And we also need, as Mr. Taylor just mentioned, we need to be able to source bees in order for us to get to the scale that we need to get to. The Chief wants to address the issues associated with it as well, so, Chief.
Thank you. Honourable Member, the bee industry is a new industry, as you rightly said. We are now developing it, and there's an opportunity to diversify. We have seen that some of our CARICOM neighbors are already doing a tremendous amount of work in developing their industry. Namely, we see a large amount of honey from Guyana, and I'm proud to say that it's now on the shelves in Barbados. I've seen it on the supermarket shelves, and that's excellent. So that will definitely feed into our honey exchange. I'm also aware that Grenada had won gold at the World Honey Show some years ago. So they also have a world-renowned honey as well. So this will all contribute to the honey exchange that we're looking to develop. Barbados has been slower in moving towards developing our apiculture industry. And there are some stats that need to be further addressed so that we can develop that. We have been working with the Apiculture Association of Barbados. They have already identified a number of forages, which is the things that the bees need to feed on, the forages that bees like in Barbados, so we have a list of that. But to really start to push forward the apiculture industry, we need to be able to classify which of those are better for pollen, which are better for nectar, because then that allows or informs the farmers who are getting into beekeeping, those who have land, for which types of forages to plant and in what composition. So that can then increase the amount of forage that is available for the bees. Additionally, as Mr. Taylor indicated, there has been some indication that the bees that we have here are not the European type bee. And that has implications as well. The European honeybee would tend to have a hive of about 50 to 60,000 bees. Bees that are more Africanized would tend to be about 10 to 12,000 in a hive. So this also have implications, which we're working with the association. We had some discussions over the weekend on, in fact, in terms of what's the ideal size to start a bee box, because that would impact on how much honey is made in a hive and how quickly the bees start to colonize the hive. But there are also other implications in how often the bees will swarm and how often they will abscond the hive. So there's also some management issues that we can assist the farmers with providing that level of technical assistance would allow them then to move faster and be able to get honey a lot sooner than they have been getting it. So it's a new industry that is being developed. There is a tremendous amount of potential for it. We also have to mention the relationship, not only bees for honey, but there's also bees for pollination. So for crops in particular, like flowering crops, cucurbits, so you're talking about cucumbers, watermelons, things like that. You need, for good formation of flower into fruit, you need 8 bee visits per flower. So to get the maximum production, we also have an opportunity to provide beehives to farmers to enhance pollination and increase the output of those types of crops. So there's tremendous growth potential for the bee industry, but we have to work with the players in the industry to continue to develop it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I feel I should point out my own view that there's no such thing as an aggressive bee. Bees tend to be assertive, perhaps, but I'm not so sure that they're aggressive. But having said that, Mr. Minister, I think, again, I want to congratulate the ministry because the work you're doing has allowed us to come to a point where, for the first time that I could think of in 20 years around this place, that we are having this aspect of agricultural endeavor being discussed in this chamber. And it suggests that we are beginning slowly to break the mold, especially with a view to how we can broaden our productive sector. Another area of equal potential is what is happening at the home agricultural station and your germplasm bank, which I think is also an innovation center. Now, for many years, historically, Barbados was the sugarcane breeding place for the world. This is the place we are the place to whom the world looked when we talked about breeds of sugarcane. It tells us, therefore, that there was a time in history where we could be leading in terms of what you do in the context of seeds and tissues and those hereditary types of considerations in the agricultural sector. My interest in this comes from my interest in international trade and international trade law. There is a trade defense posture which a country should take in an area where it has some proven skills. And we obviously had proven skills in terms of breeding and the study of sugarcane. Now, hereditary and genetic material can be lost through the passage of time. New types of agricultural practices evolve, et cetera, and if you're not careful, you may lose certain skill sets that you previously had in that particular strain. And equally, from a trade offensive posture, in other words, helping a country to sell its goods into other people's markets, you need to work hard on developing your seeds and your tissues, et cetera, and studying how best you can get the best refinement so that you have a product that is as competitive as possible. Now, that is a very technical way of putting it. What I want to invite you to do, Minister, is to indicate the way in which you are approaching the study of your germplasm, or the work that is being done at the germplasm bank at the home, and share with this country and by extent this Parliament, by extension the country, the potential advantages that this allows us to now have in the context of seeking to boost our export potential.
Thank you, Senior Minister. I am going to give you the political response after I've asked the Chief Agricultural Officer, Mr. Michael James and Mr. Wayne Baker, to speak about the project that's going to take place at the Home Agriculture Station. You do recall that the estimates the Prime Minister set aside $15 million for us to be able to develop a project there that will give us security in terms of our tissue culture, our seed bank that will also give us an opportunity to be able to assist CARICOM member countries as well. And we are now at the point of design and layout, and therefore I would invite the chief to speak to it first because she speaks to the technical side of it, and Mr. Michael James as well speaks to the technical side of it, and then I would ask Mr. Baker to speak about it because he's also pretty much involved in the design of the project.
Yes, Honourable Member, sorry. As it relates to developing or expanding our tissue culture lab, we have a small tissue culture facility currently at the home. And historically, it was designed mostly to focus on tissue culture for ornamentals. One of the important parts in maintaining the productivity of our crops is ensuring that we have disease-free, pathogen-free planting material. And this is where tissue culture comes in for the types of crops that are reproduced by tissue culture, by cuttings, by stem cuttings, things like that. So we're talking primarily things like our root crops, sweet potatoes, yams, edos. We're talking about other things that could have diseases, things like papaya that have bunchy top disease. So if there are particular varieties or particular types of breeds, varieties that we do have here, we can clean up that planting material and ensure that what is available to the public, what is available to farmers, they're starting on a clean genetic base. So the intention is to build a much bigger facility that would allow us to provide the volume of planting material that is necessary to really accelerate our agricultural program. So take a product like sweet potato, for example. The minute that you plant sweet potatoes, there are insects out there that are constantly infecting these sweet potatoes and transmitting viruses and things like that, and Michael James will speak more to that. But what happens over time is that you see the vigor and the yield going down, and sometimes when you go to harvest your sweet potatoes, you've got vines at the top and nothing at the bottom. So this is where tissue culture comes in. At least 25% of your slip that you're planting each time should be coming from disease-free planting material. So when we have a facility such as this, we are able then to respond to the farmer's need for clean planting material, things like bananas and plantains as well that also tend to get a lot of diseases, some types of tree crops, and not only in terms of diseases, but in terms of being able to generate more planting material quicker. The Honourable Member for St. Joseph has lamented we don't have enough breadfruits, and we are actually getting a shipment of tissue culture derived plantlets very soon for breadfruits into Barbados. Soon we'll be able to generate that type of planting material, so we'll be able to propagate plants a lot faster and get the quality and the consistency that we're looking for.
Just to follow on from the Chief Agriculture Officer, Minister, I smelled when you said the different types, hereditary, local varieties or local races. Say, for instance, you have the Bajan belly pumpkin, Bajan thyme, which is a bit different than the one that is, for want of a better word, flimsy. You have the Bajan cucumber. You have whole sets of Bonavis. So what this facility is supposed to do is be a repository of these types of plants, seeds, true seed, as in seed, or for instance, like the chief was saying, for the sweet potato and so on. It would allow us also to clean up, as she said, certain varieties of plants. Say, for instance, before we had internal brown spot of yams, and through tissue culture, we were able to get rid of that particular disease. I know you don't really see a lot of yams with internal brown spot. So the thing is to clean up. So is one, a repository, so we can, if, for instance, there's a storm, hurricane, and things go, you don't have to import these things. You would have a repository here. We can also help our neighbors in the OECS and so forth to send them some material. We can also host material that they have. So that is the vision that you have. But the main thing is that you want to have a repository base here in Barbados that you can go out and say, listen, I want some Bajan cucumber, or I want some Bajan thyme, or I never see a belly pumpkin before. So that's the sort of thing we want to see happening. So not only are we doing it to replenish and to export the sweet potato, but we're doing it to ensure that we have planting material that we can source if there are dangers or anything happens that, like the storms or hurricanes. Yes? Thank you.
And you also had asked about the Innovation Center as well. The Barbados Innovation Center, the vision for that, and I know we did get a question as to how we are reaching the public and educating them more. And the Innovation Center allows us to have a center. It's first of all a display center, which will be a display of the more modern technologies. Of course, our target audience will be schools and kids, and start to educate them about the types of careers and opportunities in agriculture, the science around agriculture, the practice of agriculture. So it becomes a central part of the development and the educational component, which is a responsibility of the Ministry of Agriculture, and which we want to partner with the Ministry of Education on, and making sure we are starting to bring that world-class and forward-looking future of agriculture to young people and get them enthused and excited, and be able then to diffuse that innovation to them. So the Innovation Center would do that. And then additionally, we're also looking to have a 3D printing laboratory, which would then give them opportunities to use 3D printing in an agricultural setting. And I've seen fantastic 3D printing being done in terms of marketing for agricultural types of materials, things like that. Also, there are some innovative pieces of equipment. Already the Barbados Met Services will print, or has been printing, weather stations using their 3D printer. So we use, and we need to use more weather stations in agriculture as part of our risk management, and being able to collect the kind of data that is critical to the responsiveness of the agricultural sector, because the more weather data that we have, the more we can predict better when we get pest and disease outbreaks, when we get heat index indications for our livestock and need to cool them down, etc. So we want to be able to start to develop through the Innovation Center this kind of exposure, and that would allow us then to start from very early, building out the kind of skill, competence, interest in the sector. And lastly, and which we had displayed at AgriFest, and I hope that you saw it, was our FarmBot, which is the robotic arm, which is demonstrating the use of robotics in agriculture in real time. And this is something that people are able to see up close and personal, as opposed to just watching it on TV and thinking it can't happen here. We are bringing that technology to say, yes, it can happen here, it is happening here, and we want to start to pioneer that for the future.
Unless you want to say something else, Minister, all I would say to you is that, there are those people out there who stoops them out and say, well, just don't do nothing. But I think that this has demonstrated not only the substantial intellectual work at foundational level, and as the Chief Agriculture Officer just pointed out, that too is married to the use of the harnessing of the technology, which in turn is married to the physical effort of doing the actual farming, but all for the purpose of enhancing the commercial value of agriculture in Barbados. It is, again, the first time that we've had this type of conversation about agriculture in this place, as far as I can recall, over the last 20 or so years, and I want to congratulate you and your team.
Thank you, Senior Minister, and I would have to congratulate my team for the support and the effort that they have put in getting us to this point. I must say to you that when I first went to the Ministry of Agriculture, I had to set myself up for all the criticism that I can receive in this country. Because if the one thing that I recognize is that we have hard-working officers, but their work is not being recognized because people spend more time criticizing than actually looking to see what is taking place. This type of presentation in this honorable chamber gives us an opportunity for Barbados to see what is really happening and to hear for themselves the work that is taking place at the ministry to create that transformational environment in agriculture that has been lacking for a very long time. And I did mention that I'm going to give the political side to it. And that basically speaks to a government that shows up every day to work, to deliver for the people of the country. But more importantly, the place where the Innovation Center and the Germplasm Bank is going is a place that is very familiar to me and has brought me to this chamber.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. James Central. Honourable Member for St. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A blessed good afternoon to all the distinguished members here. I want to add my congratulatory comments to the Honourable Minister and his dynamic team for the excellent achievements thus far. As a young girl growing up in rural Barbados, our parents worked really very hard in the agricultural belt. And most mornings they will say, go to school and learn. This kind of work is not for you, it is slave work. And I believe that that stigma struck home with most Barbadians. But I want to say how proud I am to hear of the achievements of the ministry and the large numbers of persons, especially young people, who are showing an interest in agriculture to be able to have it as a business enterprise. I also want, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, to indicate my pride and joy to see how the Honourable Minister and his team have drilled down so many areas of the strategic objectives that they have got to be able to bring the measure of success that makes me really feel proud. And of course, I want to add that this is the first time in about 4 decades, almost, that we have really seen the Ministry of Agriculture excel to this level. I know that when the former Honourable Member for St. Joseph, now Sir Richard, would have been in agriculture, we saw strides, and Barbados' economy was growing as a result of what we were able to develop and to trading. And therefore, the minister must be highly commended. A sharp man, but has great potential for what we are seeing now. And sometimes sharp men are not seen to be so dynamic. But the Honourable Minister is with the work he's doing in the Ministry of Agriculture. I cannot speak to anything else. I also want Mr. Chairman to indicate that our young children, indeed, let me speak, because if you're a septuagenarian plus, then you should know what Barbados would have been like, particularly when you were raised in rural Barbados with a large family. Poverty was really in almost every household. And the school which I attended, I call it the Holy Innocents College, we never spent a day without going into the garden and planting garden beds at school. And when it came to home, it was not only planting garden beds though, but it was to tend to the animals, the cow, the sheep, the goat, the pig, the chicken. The only thing you didn't have to pay a lot of attention to was the dog. And therefore, we have drifted away from those practices that help to develop our society because we've sought to get the free education, which is excellent. But there are still areas in our society and in our development that we must focus on if we are to get our people's mindset changed, to let them see that doing agriculture is an honorable job and that you can make a living out of agriculture. And unless that stigma is removed, it's going to destroy everything else that we're working towards. 4-H movement, a wonderful thing. From my entire childhood, I knew about the 4-H movement. And I saw the success that it has made, and I'm wondering, where are we now with it? And what plans, because I always talk about synergies. What is happening at this present moment in my country? Are there synergies with the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Agriculture and Community Development in the way that we expect? Because we need to get our children's mindsets as well towards growing what they eat and eating what they grow. And therefore, we have too many massive facilities called schools compounds that are closed at 3:30 and 4 o'clock, unless they're doing continuing education classes, and very little of that is happening. You can't even access the schools in the way you would like to have simple meetings and educational training for certain components that you would like to see develop in the communities. Our schools have large tracts of land that are shut down at 3 o'clock. Nothing is happening. Every single school in Barbados, Mr. Chairman, should have an agricultural plant associated with it. Because if the children are doing the studies at fourth and fifth form level, then they need to get the practical opportunities. But some parents with their stigmatized minds are saying, not my child is digging up in dirt, but then when I grow my little watermelons, they want me to literally want to give it away. That is so expensive. Go home and buy yours, though. You have put your house on the property, you have land, but you are not growing anything but grass because you want your lawn. Well, go and socialize on your lawn, but when you're eating my watermelon, you have to pay for it if you want to get the benefits. And I believe that having moved away again from the traditional aspect of rural Barbados more so than urban, because urban didn't have enough space to do as much. Every single house in St. Thomas and rural Barbados had at it a flower garden bed at the front with the marigolds that we call stinking missies. Everybody knows them, but I don't know if the young people in here know. But we had marigolds, we had lilies, we had some of everything at the front to keep in front of our house that would have been unpainted, well decorated. But at the back, Mr. Chairman, garden beds, the butter beans, the lettuce, the carrots, you name them, because we had to feed ourselves because there was no other way of poor people getting anything to eat because the money was so limited. And we've moved away a lot of that from our culture. And our children are suffering. Every school should have a competition. Every school, having grown the vegetables, should have a day for sales where parents and guardians and neighbors around the school can come and purchase and help to build up the budget that the school needs, the funds that the school needs, I should say, to be able to make the difference. And so I want to highly commend the team again for our AgroFest and the outstanding success that we would have recognized over the last few days. And so I come to the question, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I will speak with you after on your bias. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I live in the heart of Barbados. I am extremely concerned that prime agricultural land is lying fallow and has been for many years, and now the River Tamarind and other trees have taken over. Land that my parents and my foreparents worked in to raise us, to build the houses they have. No, there was no national housing to give them any house. They had to work and earn. And I want to find out what plans that the Ministry of Agriculture and this government has in relation to the Scotland district, but more particularly with this one, with what is happening at plantations such as Sturgis, Bloomsbury, Springvale, Vaucluse, Endeavour, King Garden, Highland, 40-acre Dings Village, Rugby, Farmers, Barrows Gully, Canefield, to name a few. It is all trees, trees, trees that you can't get anything from to eat. Those were areas where we had sugarcane or vegetables and fruit trees where we did not have a shortage of grapefruits and breadfruits and all that. I want to find out what this government intends to do if they're going to lease some of that land to ordinary folk who want to do agriculture, like the situation is, sir, in your constituency, where you have the land lease projects going and people are now getting a viable development to be able to raise funds and do what they have to do as a result of their engagement. I believe the Honourable Minister may want to give me some idea as to what is happening, because except for the grass and the trees growing, I've got monkeys.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I am pleased to hear your passion. We are definitely going to make sure we do all that we can to address the issues that you raised, but I'll let the Chief Agriculture Officer speak to the the issue with the schools, and then, of course, with the plantations that you mentioned, so that we can get a clear understanding of what is going on with regard to those plantations.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The 4-H movement is an integral part of the agricultural landscape, especially as we were just having a conversation related to developing the minds of youth. And in fact, the 4-H movement has proven itself to be one of the most important movements, or probably the biggest movement in terms of youth development, and especially helping positive development within youth is an opportunity to bring at-risk youth back into the mainstream, because working with plants and that reconnection to nature is very important in terms of developing the minds of young people, engaging them and giving them a sense of worth, of self-esteem. All of those things happen when we connect with the land, and that is one of the social aspects of agriculture, which sometimes we don't give enough. We don't give enough of the conversation to as we talk about food security, but it's a critical part of our development as a people. And it certainly is an important part of the Ministry of Agriculture and the work that we are doing. So in that regard, we have been in discussions with the 4-H movement on how we can help to revitalize the movement, how we can expand the movement and see the kind of vibrancy that it had in the 80s and 90s, etc. And part and parcel of that is also tying the 4-H movement, or encouraging the 4-H movement to be a partner in the Barbados Innovation Center. Another partner in the Barbados Innovation Center is the the Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture, ICA. And this institute also has with it a component. Actually, today was the closing ceremony for their youth farm program. And they hold that every year, again, in conjunction with the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Agriculture. And ICA has been doing this youth summer program and this youth farm program to help, again, engage youth in agriculture. So one of the things that the ministry is looking to do is to bring together the synergies of the 4-H movement, IICA. We are already partners with our Ministry of Education and looking to see how we can use that to create even more momentum as it relates to agriculture and having the youth more engaged in agriculture. Additionally, as it relates to community gardening and getting more of gardening type activities going. This is where the CARE program is not just in terms of giving out resources, but we are looking to develop a Master Gardener program, again in conjunction with ICA, and that development is then going to, you would have support in terms of having a Master Gardener in every constituency and eventually in every community that can provide that kind of gardening support to help have that community engagement, because the difference is that we are not the agrarian society that we were in 1970. So you do need to offer more technical support at the gardening level to communities to be able to get them to continue in the work that they're doing, and that service can be provided. Additionally, government also supports the 4-H Foundation through our annual subvention, which we have always provided annually, and that's about $200,000 each year. So we do provide that that financial support to the 4-H movement. So this is part of it as well. And in answering the question as it relates to prime agricultural land laying fallow, and particularly in St. Thomas, I have noticed many of these plantations are no longer in production. We are aware that these plantations are all privately owned. And one of the initiatives of the BADMC, given that we were constrained in terms of having enough land for feed farmers, we've actually started to reach out to private landowners to discuss how we could, as the government through the BADMC, lease those lands and then offer a sublease to farmers And this would then create that opportunity to get those lands in production again and increase that productive capacity of the nation. So that work has already started, and we have engaged with a number of private plantations that are either out of production currently or maybe thinking about going out of production. So we don't want to see those lands idle with the River Tamarind. So that is part of the initiative to ensure that we are getting as much of the land back into production as possible.
My second question or comment, sir, is related to the aquaponics project at Hopewell. It is one of the most unique projects I've ever seen, because I don't have an interest particularly in agriculture. And I am trying to find out from this team of distinguished professionals in agriculture to indicate what plans there could be for our various communities to be able to participate in such. The rain falls in St. Thomas every day. So there's water. Even though we may not be able to hold the water, it goes to the whole town and other places and floods their areas. However, I would wish to know what could be incorporated from that project, which the Honourable Minister and I would have visited about 2 years ago, and we saw how valuable it is. They're growing the fish and all that, and then their lettuce and all that on top of the water. And it looks to me like a low-cost way to develop it for the beginning, but it can have long-term dividends. And I would like to know if there are any connections that the ministry has in mind to be able to engage other persons. We must not assume that young people do not want to get in agriculture. If they get the exposure and the training, as we are seeing happening in other projects in the ministry, I believe that this will be one that will be attracted to them, because it doesn't seem like a great lot of work that they will have to do. But I'm only speaking out of the level of ignorance where that is concerned. I'm not so sure if the Honourable Minister or any of his team members can tell us anything about that. And then I have one other short question to make up my three.
Yes, Honourable Member, the aquaculture is, again, one of the areas that the Ministry of Agriculture is looking to diversify the agricultural portfolio with. And in that regard, we have been looking at building up capacity. We have started, again, through the BADMC. We have been looking, as Mr. Innes would have indicated from BADMC, at fish farming on a larger scale, but we are recently have been looking at the smaller scale type aquaculture type projects. Again, at the ministry's tent at AgriFest, we would have been collaborating with ICA and would have demonstrated Senator Charleston Braffett green machine. And we are also aware of at least 2 other young persons who are developing aquaponic systems here in Barbados. And they're also interested in expanding in terms of the production of such systems to make them available to other persons who are interested in a smaller footprint type of aquaculture. We did get a lot of interest at AgriFest. We also had an aquaculture display through the BADMC, and we are seeing quite a lot of interest in that regard. So we are trying to do 2 things. One, to look at the large-scale opportunities for aquaculture, but also to build out our capacity within the ministry and the BADMC to be able to provide the technical support for aquaponics and aquaculture, and also to develop or to work with those persons who are already in the private sector doing these things on a small scale, and see how we can assist them to ramp up to offer more of these services, these types of systems ready built to go to persons who are interested. So this is part of the work that we want to do to be able to expand that opportunity, develop this side of agriculture, fish farming on land. We do know that we have our normal fisheries, but there is this growing interest and particularly the opportunity for shrimp Farming is a tremendous opportunity in terms of reducing our food import bill. Likewise, for fish, fish is one of the larger areas on the food import bill that we can tackle by doing some of these things here in Barbados. So it's a new area, but we are working to develop it, and eventually we would have that critical momentum that is needed to really see a significant dent in our food import bill as it relates to fish.
And my final query, sir. I want to publicly laud the efforts of two distinguished gentlemen whom I hear every Thursday morning once I'm anywhere near CBC, Messrs. Gibbs and Gill. And I think that the efforts that they are making to educate Barbadians about growing plants and how to treat to them must be highly commended, but it is too limited because the calling program goes on and on and on with those two gentlemen answering all kinds of questions, simple things that regular persons want to hear they don't know about. And I believe that if we continue with the educational fora, not necessarily only on a Thursday morning with those, perhaps they're both retired gentlemen, but of course with the ministry itself with its own program, I believe that we can do better from the point of view that here I am living in the heart of Barbados, and I had the privilege sometime in 2018-19 to speak with a Professor O'Gara at the University of the West Indies about the entrepreneurial project at Duke's Plantation, where Mr. Edgell would have donated a 30-acre lot of land at that time. And that would have been done when there was another administration. So you're talking almost 10 years ago.
Honourable member, for the sake of the chair, get to the question.
Well, I had to give the background, but very well, sir. And thank you for giving me the different treatment, but that is fine. No disrespect meant. I thank you for reminding me. I just want to say then, I want the Honourable member and his team to tell us about that 30-acre novel project going on now under the Chinese at Duke's Plantation, because nobody in St. Thomas knows anything about it except you're seeing it going up, the gentlemen are working, the road is all dug up, but we have absolutely no knowledge except the little bit I have in my head. Thank you, sir, for your patience.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Well, first of all, the donation of 30 acres of land was simply that, just a donation. The land still had to be conveyed in order for the university to be able to use the land, and the last administration did nothing about getting it conveyed to the University of the West Indies. So yes, the good intention was to donate the 30 acres of land so they can have the project going. But an institution like the University of the West Indies will not go and put a project on land that is not conveyed to them. And so former Minister of Education, now DPM, and Minister at MTW, and I worked on that project to make sure we can get the conveyancing done. This is a project within the University of the West Indies and is anchored at the Ministry of Education. And therefore, we were able to deliver on our promise to get the land conveyed to the University of the West Indies so that they can move ahead with that project. Frankly, it was a fairly big source of embarrassment to note that the Chinese were pushing and pushing to get that project going, and they did not do anything about the conveyancing so that the project could have forged ahead. We have settled all that now, and the project is moving ahead. And really and truly, I do agree with the member that she should know more about what is happening, but I don't think it is too late because we've only just completed all of the conveyancing and stuff to get the project started. And I would strongly suggest then that, she gets a site visit and all the updates with reference to the project be given to her so that she and her constituents would know what's going on.
Thank you. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I beg to move that you do not report progress to His Honour the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
The question is that I do know report progress to His Honour the Speaker and ask for leave to sit again. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Honourable members against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
chairman has reported progress and requests leave to sit again. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 4:45 p.m.
The question is that this honourable chairman be suspended until 4:45 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honourable chairman stands suspended until 4:45 p.m.